Hi.
Hello again. We're in the Proclaimer's book, page 46 and 47. And the subhead here is Time Prophecies and the Presence of the Lord. We met people like Jonas Wendell and George Stetson and George Storrs in the previous segments, all of whom were foggy characters even to me, and I knew something that watched our history, until this book came along in the early 1990s. And now we're looking at these sections which amount to damage control, because these names have been made known, as we pointed out last time, by James Penton and others in the 1980s. So why is it that you can only find this information through apostates, so-called? So now here's what they have to say after the Penton and Setnar and Magnani and Ray Fran's damage has been around for a few years. Time Prophecies and the Presence of the Lord. First paragraph says, one morning in January 1876, 23-year-old Russell received a copy of a religious periodical called Herald of the Morning. From the picture on the cover, he could see that it was identified with Adventism. The editor, Nelson H. Barbour of Rochester, New York, believed that the object of Christ's return was not to destroy the families of the earth, but to bless them, and that his coming would not be in the flesh, but as a spirit. Why, this was in agreement with what Russell and his associates in Allegheny had believed for some time. Curiously, though, Barbour believed from biblical time prophecies that Christ was already present invisibly, and that the harvest work of gathering the wheat, true Christians making up the kingdom class, was already due.
Maybe I should read the footnote that was in your paragraph. It says, neither Barbour nor Russell was the first to explain the Lord's return as an invisible presence. Much earlier, Sir Isaac Newton, who lived from 1642 to 1727, had written that Christ would return and reign, invisible to mortals. In 1856, Joseph Seiss, a Lutheran minister in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, had written about a two-stage second advent, an invisible parousia or presence, followed by a visible manifestation. Then in 1864, Benjamin Wilson had published his emphatic Diaglott with the interlinear reading presence, not coming, for parousia. And B.W. Keith, an associate of Barbour, had drawn it to the attention of Barbour and his associates. Then the next paragraph says, Russell had shied away from biblical time prophecies. Now, however, he wondered, could it be that the time prophecies, which I had so long despised because of their misuse by Adventists, were really meant to indicate when the Lord would be invisibly present to set up his kingdom? With his insatiable thirst for scriptural truth, Russell had to learn more. So he arranged to meet with Barbour in Philadelphia. This meeting confirmed their agreement on a number of Bible teachings and provided an opportunity for them to exchange views. When we first met, Russell later stated, he had much to learn from me on the fullness of restitution based upon the sufficiency of the ransom given for all, as I had much to learn from him concerning time. Barbour succeeded in convincing Russell that Christ's invisible presence had begun in 1874.
The next subhead is Resolved upon a vigorous campaign for the truth. C.T. Russell was a man of positive convictions. Convinced that Christ's invisible presence had begun, he was determined to proclaim it to others. He later said, the knowledge of the fact that we were already in the harvest period gave to me an impetus to spread the truth such as I had never had before. I therefore at once resolved upon a vigorous campaign for the truth with a capital T here. Russell now decided to curtail his business interests so as to devote himself to preaching.
To counteract wrong views regarding the Lord's return, Russell wrote the pamphlet, The Object and Manner of Our Lord's Return. It was published in 1877. The same year, Barbour and Russell jointly published Three Worlds and the Harvest of This World. This 196-page book discussed the subjects of restitution and biblical time prophecies. Though each subject had been treated by others before, in Russell's view, this book was the first to combine the idea of restitution with time prophecies. It presented the view that Jesus Christ's invisible presence dated from the autumn of 1874.
As Russell traveled and preached, it became evident to him that something more was needed to keep the seeds of truth he was sowing alive and watered. The answer? A monthly journal, said Russell. So he and Barbour decided to revive publication of the Herald, which had been suspended because of canceled subscriptions and exhausted funds. Russell contributed his own funds to revive the journal, becoming one of its co-editors. All went well for a while, until 1878, that is. I was struck by the first of all, he's 23 years old in 1876 when all of this getting to know Barbour and his associates and picking up this doctrine of the invisible presence and the date 1874. But the thing that really hit me hard here was that who do they go to? And it says that Russell had an insatiable thirst for scriptural truth, but who is he going to get his information?
Adventists. Well, most of them have an Adventist background, or at least to people who are fringe.
Yeah, all of these people are not recognized scholars. They're not recognized or hands laid on by other people, and that's a basic teaching that I think we and the witnesses should think about. A lot of people in the evangelical world too. The principle of laying on of hands in the book of Hebrews 6 is a basic teaching, Hebrews says. And we remember what Paul said about that when he's talking to Timothy, who is himself a young man, saying to him, don't lay hands hastily on any man that you appoint. Well, who laid hands on any of these people? The only recognizable names here are Newton, who, by the way, is not a Bible scholar, a famous scientist, and Unitarian, by the way, and Seiss. Joseph Seiss is a Lutheran pastor, all right, but he's on the fringe of Lutheranism.
He doesn't represent what most Lutherans believed.
No, and the thing that seems to attract Russell to people like that is there's something about their teaching which is fringe and peculiar. So with Seiss, it is the pyramid. He wrote a book on the pyramid, which Russell later cited in Thy Kingdom Come, the third volume of studies.
And if they already are in agreement with something like that, first paragraph that you read said why this was in agreement with what Russell and his associates believed for some time. So he's looking for confirmation, really. So that's what he seems to be seeking here.
We did a video on that.
The Wilson one you also mentioned was Christadelphian.
Yeah, he's Christadelphians.
It's another Adventist type involvement or connection.
So what are the things he agrees with? Well, the idea of a restoration is the big one. All of these groups have in common the idea that the truth was lost.
Yeah.
And that they have to restore it.
And it even says in the second paragraph that I read, could it be that the time prophecies which I had so long despised because of their misuse by Adventists, and then he goes to Adventists for support, like for confirmation.
And it's not like there weren't dozens of books on Revelation and Daniel and all the other books that Russell ended up using a lot. There were lots of things that could have been consulted that were better than the things that are listed here. Even Seiss, who is a pretty good commentator, but he's eccentric in that he attaches himself to this idea of the Great Pyramid, confirming Bible prophecy.
But see, so part of what they agree on is that there's a need for restoring. They want, so they probably would reject those because that's not the emphasis of commentaries.
That's right.
It wouldn't be restoration.
And by the way, even though a lot of commentators believed in the day-year theory that they pick up from the Adventists, A lot of commentaries before the Adventists believed in the day-year theory, but by the time Russell came along, most of them had discarded it.
Yeah, it certainly can't be presented as truth, like that It's a theory.
Well, I love this. Russell was a man of positive conviction, so this 23, 24-year-old man goes out and starts preaching what he just learned.
Yeah.
That is in violation of the principle we just talked about, the laying on of hands. Who authorized Russell to go preaching this stuff? And it wasn't just 1874 that was in the three worlds. It was a whole system of dates.
Right.
So this is the truth, capital T, truth, that he's going out preaching?
I hadn't noticed that the first time reading it, but twice in that paragraph it has truth with a capital T.
Who else was preaching 1914, 1874 Invisible Presence, 1878 Kingdom? Who else was preaching that stuff in those days? Only the cranks on the periphery of the church. No mainstream scholars were preaching this stuff.
So they're basically self-appointed to do the preaching of some theory that they've just come up with.
And this word that keeps coming back into the book, restitution. This idea that we're the only ones preaching restitution. What does it mean?
It's kind of a slap on the face of God and Christ that somehow things got lost along the way.
We're restoring it.
We need to restore it. And it is also a common factor in other groups that are considered cults.
Yes, they all have the restoration theory, but unfortunately, something. Barbour and Russell pick up another idea in this, isn't this word restitution, which is based on Peter's words in Acts chapter 3. The restitution for them is not just restoration. It is the idea that God is obligated to give people a second chance. So the purpose of the millennium is the restitution of all things and bringing back all of the dead who never heard the truth.
Oh, to give them a chance to hear it from their point of view.
And a lot of witness offshoot groups carry that idea, which really comes from Barbour. That's admitted here.
Okay.
So it's a very dangerous idea that God owes you complete truth in order to be able to judge you. That's not the case. What has the church been preaching for 2 millennia? It's the idea that God is quite capable, without the help of watching you for 1,000 years, of deciding what your attitude is towards truth.
He's the only true judge because he sees everything about you. Your inner thinking, your circumstances. He's the only one that can actually give a true judgment. He doesn't need to watch you and see how you're doing.
No, he's not learning like we are.
Yeah, he's outside of that.
Outside of time.
Yeah.
And he created time. And that's, again, one of the limitations of Russellism and Jehovah's Witnesses theology to this day is you have a God who's confined like you are.
He's waiting and watching for your reactions. He's not outside of time. Yeah, that's true. And I think for some, they'll think, well, see, this book is telling you all about their early history. They're so honest. But admitting something after you've been caught, it's the 1990s when they finally tell you this stuff.
In its fullness, yeah.
Yeah, so that's not exactly credible.
Yeah.
It doesn't make you credible. It doesn't even really make you honest, because if you honestly admit your hand is in the cookie jar while it's in the cookie jar, nobody's impressed. It's
So I had learned about Nelson Barbour a little bit from the older publications, but all these other names were new to me.
Yeah.
Why? Because they wanted to minimize the fact that Russell got a lot of his ideas from other people.
Yeah, somebody else had to expose it for you to know that any of these names.
But this idea of restitution is outside the Orthodox pale. For 2,000 years, the Church has been preaching Judgment Day. They differ on aspects of eschatology and what will lead up to Judgment Day, but they all have in common no second chance.
Yeah. Now the next subheading for the next one is Russell breaks with Barbour. So they didn't last too long together.
And yet...
And Barbour then is called evil.
The evil
right?
slave.
He's not Russell. Being used. He's not been used by God. And yet much of Russell's teaching he got from Barbour.
Yep. It's all true.
And yet God is using Russell, but not Barbour.
So Russell is anointed, but Barbour's teachings, which went through, now are being filtered through Russell. They're not suspect because they came from Barbour, but he's the evil slave.
Yeah.
It doesn't add up when you tell the whole story, does it?
And even this tendency of breaking with people after such a short period should tell us something.
Yeah.
That this is being thrown about on every wind.
Yeah,
teaching.
Paul says in Galatians that among the works of the flesh are divisions and schisms. And that from the beginning has been the character of Russell's career.
Yeah.
We're going to link to how many dates did Russell and Rutherford actually set up. We just did a video on that very subject. And also to the playlist, J.W. Roots, which is mostly a page-by-page examination of this book mentioned here, Three Worlds and the Harvest of This World.
Written by
Barbour and Russell, although most of it apparently was by Barbour. So the harvest idea, that it started in 1874, well, it's a false teaching from the beginning.
But it gives you all the other dates and theories that they had.
Yeah, sample that playlist in J.W. Root's playlist, and you'll see just how many dates they had. We've listed quite a few of them. See you soon.
Bye.